Hi, my name is Justin. I'm a pastor and seminary professor, creating some videos for my students and others to learn how to use Logos Bible software. In this video, I want to work a little bit at the sermon I'm preparing for Sunday and show you some of the basic tools that I can use in Logos to streamline this process. So first, I've got a blank open layout here. If you start Logos on its own, it usually starts on this home page. If you click home, it'll just take you to this empty thing here. And I want to show you a pretty handy little tool. If I go up to the icon at the very top, they've hidden this a little bit, and I click this, it will open up a little Go box. That's what they call this, the Go box. And I can type something into there. In this case, I want to find Luke 6, beginning in verse 12. And you can see that it will give me several options here. Let's zoom in. Here we go. Luke 6:12, and you can see some of the options I have here. I can open the fact book to Jesus' ministry in Galilee, and I can see next to that would give me Luke 4:14 all the way to 9:50, this whole big section of the Gospel of Luke, and that's not really what I'm looking for. Jesus chooses disciples as his ministry grows, and Luke 5:1 through 6:16, so there's the next section. Or what I actually want, the selection of the 12 apostles, Luke 6:12 through 16, biblical reference, biblical pericope. Pericope is basically like a paragraph, and this is about the unit that you usually use. So 6:12 through 16 is what I'm going to be looking at. Now I can click Open Factbook, and it will automatically give me selection of the 12 apostles. And it'll give me some information about that one. Again, it gives me the reference here, and if I click that, it will open the Bible up to that passage. I can blow this up a little bit for you. And it'll show me the context of this. So it's a gospel is the kind of literature I'm looking at. It's in the Gospels. It's in the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's in Luke specifically. It's in Jesus' ministry in Galilee, as we saw, which goes from the middle of chapter 4 to the end of chapter 9. Jesus chooses his disciples, his ministry grows. Again, that's 5 through 6:16. And then now the selection of the 12 apostles. So this is kind of a map, right? I'm in the Gospels as literature. I'm in one of the 4 Gospels. I'm in one of the first 3 Gospels. I'm in Luke. I'm in the second chunk of Luke. I'm in this part of that chunk, and now I'm in this exact paragraph. Sometimes it's a helpful little "you are here" type thing. It gives it to me again in just a different way here, or finally here, the Bible, the New Testament, the historical books, the Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels, Luke, and then so on. So this just sort of helps you orient yourself to where your pericope is. The next thing the Factbook will give me is a key article. This is a top dictionary type article that it uses. Usually they use their own. Lexham is the name of the press, the Logos Press. Faith Life is the name of the company. And so they use their articles for this, but they're usually pretty good. And so it tells me here's a key article on this passage, like some context commentary. I can scroll on past that, and it'll give me some media. In this case, a mouse over at Christ retreats to the mountain at night. These are some slides, backgrounds that I could use, say Luke and stuff on them. Jesus goes up on a mountain alone to pray, open in media tool. Or I could search for other stuff other than the top things it shows here. It puts it in the event here. This is open 17 passages in CSB. If I click this, then it will give me the relevant passages here. You can't see, can you? Let me scoot this over just a bit. You can see where it has the passages where I can click through and find the references here. I don't find that super helpful, but you might. So it'll give me sermons that I have about that passage. I don't have that many, clearly, that deal with this specific text, but there's 3 from Spurgeon, 13 from John MacArthur, Martin Luther, Tim Keller. So I can open one of these up, right? So I can click on this, and Logos would automatically open up this sermon on Luke 6:12, and I could use that if I was interested in doing so. I can close that. Factbook tags, there's nothing here in this passage. And then I get into the See Also section. So the Factbook is a good starting place for almost everything, but really I like to start with the passage guide for preparing a sermon. And so let's click this. You can use the sermon starter guide as well. I just don't use a lot of the illustrations and stuff that are in there. The exegetical guide is also very useful, but let's start with the passage guide here. So I click this. I've customized my passage guide. You can do that by going to these 3 dots up top and clicking Edit This Guide right here. And then it'll let you add whatever you want. You can drag over here. So anything that has to do with a passage, you can plug in here. So I'll just explain to you kind of what I have. First, I have textual variants. This, it may be easier to go through it in the actual passage where it's filled in. Go textual variants. So this shows me apparatuses and stuff that say, is there any kind of discussion or dispute about the actual Greek text that's being used for translations? The textual commentary up top is the easiest one, and you can see right here it even highlights for me that this is what I'm looking at, and it gives me Iscarioth and tells me there's a dispute there. It says see the comment on Matthew 10:4. I click that, and it tells me that the textual problems of the name Iscariot are connected with its meaning. There's debate about does it come from Carioth or does it come from this word for assassin, and so the spelling is slightly different based on what meaning it's given, and so that is not translatable into English. That means that there's no substantial differences for me to worry about. So no matter what translation the people listening to me have, the text behind it is not going to make a substantial difference. The apparatuses are somewhat more technical and will give you a lot of stuff that can't be translated. So the textual commentary is a good place for a quick check. If you're a nerd like me, then of course you'll want to click the critical apparatus and get really into all this stuff. As well. This is a cool place to show you another thing. So notice here, you look at this, and you've got Tertullian here who is referencing, they're using Tertullian's quotation of Mark to discuss the wording here. Let me blow this up as well. Tertullian was the first Latin father, and so he's writing in Latin. So in Logos 10, if you have gold or higher, which if you're at the TBI, you do, as part of your package, you get the full feature set. If you right-click this, and then you click over to this hidden little gem right here, it's Translate. If I click Translate, it will open this up for me and tell me that that means certainly he ascends the mountain and spends the night there in prayer and is certainly heard by his Father. And so there's a really useful cool feature, when you're reading books. A lot of times theology books will have Latin or French or German or whatever in them, and if you're not comfortable in those languages, then you can bounce around like this. So that's the critical apparatus, and I can go down here to the Atlas next. The Atlas will show me these things in place, right? So there's 2 maps here, Biblical World, Life of Jesus, and Jesus Resumes His Ministry in Galilee. I'll click Biblical World, Life of Jesus, and it gives me this map right here. It takes a second to shade it in, but it'll show me these places as well. So I could zoom in and I could look at where these things are happening and say, okay, this is in Galilee. If I click, so if I go back to the text itself, right here, I can click this, look up Luke 6:12 through 16. I can see, okay, where are these things taking place? they're walking through a grain field. It doesn't seem immediately like there is anything to tell me exactly where this was. So I can right-click it and see if any locations are tagged here in this passage. It doesn't look like there are. So I just know that we're in Galilee. And so in this case, the atlas is not tremendously useful, but I can at least identify, okay, here's Nazareth. For some context, though, here is Gennesaret, which, Jesus performs lots of miracles here. If I go to Nazareth and I hold down the control button on Windows while I drag it, I'm sure it's Command on Mac, and I come over here, it'll tell me that the distance is 18 miles or 29 kilometers. And so you can find distances and stuff like this if you hold down Shift, then it will let you pick a box to zoom in on. So again, if you hold down Control while you click, you can find the distance between 2 points. If you hold down Shift, you can zoom in, and of course you can zoom out as well. I could go to these, I could switch it from terrain map to like a political map, just a flat map, but it doesn't make much difference. The terrain one looks a little bit nicer with the shading. You can see where is the higher water percentages and stuff like that. I can click the top 3 things here, and I can send this to PowerPoint or Proclaim if I wanted to. So just to like look at Nazareth here, if I wanted to, for some reason, put this in a slideshow, if I was teaching something and I wanted to draw attention to this, I'd click these 3 dots and I could click Send to PowerPoint or Send to Proclaim. Or I could click Open Google Maps. And if I click Open Google Maps, this is really neat. You can see here, it opens Google Maps to the same spot as I was in. And so I can see, okay, here's modern day Nazareth right there. You can see it did a really good job of this. A cool thing with this, of course, is that with Google Maps, I can zoom way in, and I can grab the little man here. I can drop down here, right, the street view, and just to give me some color about kind of pretending, okay, I'm here in Nazareth, where Jesus would be up in the mountains calling his disciples, and this is what it looks like today, It's just a neat little feature that you're able to do that. And you could, in some cases, you could say, okay, Nazareth is modern day whatever. Of course, Nazareth is modern day Nazareth. And so that's not quite as helpful as it might be in something else. So I can close this window out and go back here. Journals, I buy the Master Journal bundle and stuff. And so if you have any theological journals, like academic journals that talk about this, it'll give you references to that. Systematic theologies, this is super cool. This is the next thing I have. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant to explain the logic of the way I customized my passage guide. Textual variants, you have to start there. I mean, that's kind of fundamental. Make sure there's no questions I need to be asking before I even start studying. Then the atlas structures me, and journals let me know, is there any kind of major debate going on right now about the passage that I should be aware of? Next, I've got systematic theologies, where I have I can see kind of what sort of theological stuff is being discussed in these passages. I usually come back and look at this later, but sometimes it's helpful to just glimpse it and kind of orient myself to what kind of themes I should be looking for. I guess I should say, too, I don't start the passage guide until I've done some study of my text. I do the textual variants, and then I diagram the passage and study it myself, and then come and look through here in this order. Biblical theologies, in the same way, I can pick this and kind of trace through these ideas the theological ideas there. Ancient literature will show me, are there any like ancient Jewish or ancient Christian references to this passage? And it'll sort that out, and I can read that. Very helpful as well. Cultural concepts. So in this case, what's an apostle? Like, how do I understand that? Well, it'll tell me apostles and prayer are two things that I may be familiar with or I may not. So I can click apostleship, and it'll open up the fact book to apostleship and give me a dictionary entry on apostleship. It'll give me other passages that talk about apostleship. It'll give me other dictionaries that talk about apostleship. This one, the Dictionary of the Later New Testament and Its Developments, is a fantastic resource. So I'm definitely read this in the course of my study. And then it gives me other related cultural concepts spelled out in different places. Anchor Yale Bible Dictionary is another great one. Just lots of really good resources here. Dictionary of Paul and His Letters, The Quest for the Origin of the Concept of Apostle. Like, you can see just a lot of great things. Same idea here in the Dictionary of Jesus and the Gospels, the origin of the idea of apostleship. So I really would want to dig deep in some of this stuff. Then it gives me journals that talk about apostleship, sermons that talk about apostleship. I don't have any books or whatever. Factbook tags is crowdsourced stuff. And then, of course, they've got their bookstore that will always give you the opportunity to buy more books if you want to. So I found this super useful in the cultural concepts tool. Then I have my commentaries broken down into 4 chunks. Okay, so the first one, I've got technical commentaries. These are commentaries like the New International Commentary on the New Testament, the Zondervan Exegetical Commentary, the Baker Exegetical Commentary, the Anchor Yale Bible, New International Greek Testament Commentary, and Pillar, as well as the United Bible Society's Translator Handbooks. Those are the ones I usually touch in my study, that are going to get a lot into the grammar and the details, but are not going to be devotional. These are not sermon commentaries. These are not commentaries that are going to apply it for me. They're commentaries that are going to get me deep and serious in the text and help me to figure out what's going on. I can sort that in Logos. I've got them sorted by priority order because I have the commentaries I like best ranked in the system. You can do that. I'll make another video at some point showing how to do that. I can sort it by what series they're in, by author, denomination of the author, what type it is. The ones I have in here are almost all exegetical. The ones that are not are kind of here by mistake. It's challenging to sort everything accurately. So Walter Lightfield doesn't belong in this section, but I'm using some automated stuff to sort it, but it's good enough. Then I have background commentaries that deal with the cultural background and stuff, Craig Keener mostly. And so this is useful too. Once I've done the grammatical work on the text, then I want to ask these questions about, okay, what other cultural stuff's going on here? Then you've got the themes, where I can see what kind of themes has faith life tagged on this passage, and how does that compare to what I think I'm seeing here. Then cross-references. I've got the New Treasury of Scripture Knowledge and the Treasury of Scripture Knowledge, which are both wonderful resources. So I click the New Treasury of Scripture Knowledge, and it'll show me cross-references for all these things, and so I can look into other passages that go along with this passage in Luke. I can see outlines that people have put together of this section or of the book, depending on what turns up. It'll find both. It'll find whatever it can find, outlines that reference this, and you can see there's a lot. Then I moved to intermediate commentaries. This is somewhere between a technical commentary and an expository commentary. So the New American Commentary, the Tyndale commentaries. I don't necessarily spend a lot of time in these, but sometimes, it's helpful to look at that. And then finally, I have my expository commentaries, right? These are commentaries that are like devotional type commentaries that will apply it and have some theological reflection. Underneath that, there's any sermons that I have in my library are helpful. I've got those in here. Illustrations. If there's illustrations that I have that go along with themes in the passage, then I can find these here. So like it'll show me, okay, church, prayer, worship, zeal, John, Matthew, Peter. I'll click prayer, right? And it'll give me illustrations about prayer. And I could see if any of these would help me put my sermon together. I don't use these very often. In fact, the further you get into the passage guide, the less likely that I use it on any given week. But that's still, sometimes it's still very useful. Next, I've got important words, and this will call my attention to specific words that I could do a word study on, right? So it says, hey, prayer is important here. And this is really cool. So I've got the word for prayer. Luke 6:12, during those days, he went up to the mountain to pray and spent all night in prayer to God. I can click lemma in passage here, and it will search all my commentaries for when the word prayer is discussed, when the passage is talking about Luke. This would be almost impossible to do with paper books, right? Even a regular search would be really hard with an ebook of some other kind. But Logos knows what the book is discussing and knows when it refers to the word prayer or the Greek word that's translated as prayer, and it will let me find when my commentaries discuss that. So I could go to the Zondervan exegetical commentary here and see where in Luke 6 it's being discussed. Very, very cool. Music. Sometimes it'll give you hymns and stuff that go along with the passage. I don't usually pick the music, so this is something I have just kind of for interest. I've accidentally got a section of generic commentaries. The last one's very cool. I think this is the last thing I have in here, and it's a useful tool, especially if you're just getting started in the software. I access a lot of this information other ways, and so that's why it's low on the list for me. So I've got it accessible where I could scroll down and find it by scrolling all the way to the bottom, but I use other tools to get it. But this finds references between this passage and other passages. So we've got the new Treasury of Scripture Knowledge that makes cross-references and stuff. But this is really cool because it's all sorted. So I can click by type, and I can say, okay, what parallel passages are there? And I can immediately see Jesus calls the disciples in Luke 6, but also in Mark 3 and in Matthew 10. Right? And so I can compare these things here. I can click shared cultural concepts, and I can see, okay, here's Jesus calling out in prayer in other places. Here's the idea of apostleship in Romans 1:1. Here's, like, if you want to trace down an idea, this is just tremendously powerful. One more example, the commentaries. These, I think, will be things that I believe that commentaries have drawn together between it. So I could sort it and just say, commentaries make the connection between them. So I could look at that. I could pick, any one of these different things and narrow it down and find passages that connect them. And so when you're thinking about how to get started in studying a passage, you can use the fact book. Some people are comfortable with the fact book. I really like this custom passage guide that I've made to match the way that I work, that step by step walks me through how I'm going to interact with the passage. I'll show you one more thing. The very first thing that I actually do is I go to Documents here, and I go to New, and I go to Sentence Diagram. Right here. I'm going to change the name of it to Luke 6:12 through 16. Enter. I'm going to do Insert Passage. Type Luke 6:12 through 16. And again, I'm going to have text flow diagram with manuscript line. Because I'm not doing serious I'm not doing serious sentence diagramming here. I just want to mark the flow in this part. And I want a manuscript line because I want to be able to add the Greek text underneath it. So I press Insert, and you say, okay, here's my paragraph. I want to delete the reference. I already have the reference up here, so I don't need that too. And then I want to drag this up and stretch the width out so it's the same as the passage. Next, I want to go to Display. and I want to click primary alternate below. And what that's going to do is it's going to give me the English word here for the translation, and then the Greek word that's being translated underneath it. And so I can see that the word and is day, and so on, right? I can compare that. If you're more comfortable with the languages, of course, you could do alternate primary below, where it will put it in Greek order and give you kind of an interlinear, and do it like this. This is not perfect. I don't do it this way because I find it confuses me, because it uses the English word order, not the Greek word order. And at least doing it this way makes me aware of the text I'm going to be preaching, and makes it obvious for me, because capital letters and stuff are out of place, that it's using the English word order, not the Greek. So then I read through it, right? And it came to pass in those days that he went out into a mountain. So you can see the word that doesn't have any Greek word under it, because it's just added for flow, right? So I take my main clauses, he went out into a mountain, and I put it against the border, the wall here. And I indent my other stuff. Right? So it came to pass in those days is telling me about how he went out into a mountain. What did he do when he went out on the mountain? He went to pray. And he continued all night. How did he continue? In prayer. What kind of prayer? To God. You say, why are you breaking it out like this? Well, one, I'm noticing something I didn't notice before, right? Almost immediately. There's no reason for it to tell me it's in prayer to God. Who else is Jesus going to be praying to? But he's emphasizing this, right? And there's prayer here, and there's prayer here. There's this, he continued all night. Right? So I'm going to jump down here. What's our next main clause? When it was day, he called unto him his disciples. So there's our next main thought. He called unto him his disciples. So I'm going to indent, and when it was day, because that's describing how he called unto him his disciples. And of them he chose 12, whom, it's modifying the 12, he also named apostles. I'm going to start over because now it's a list. Simon, whom he also named Peter, and Andrew his brother, James and John, Philip and Bartholomew, Matthew and Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, and Simon called Zelotes, and Judas the brother of James, and Judas Iscariot, which was also the traitor. I'm going to indent that. I, of course, could indent the brother of James, or could indent these other things, but when I'm studying this, it's just a list, right? So I want to notice the way the list is put together. And I noticed these pairs, right? Simon and Andrew, James and John, Philip and Bartholomew, Matthew and Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus and Simon Zelotes, Judas the brother of James, and Judas Iscariot. That it gives it to me. You notice these other ands in the King James Version are not, there's no Greek word behind them. It's just an empty space. And so I notice, it may be important and it may not be important, that the text gives me the 12 apostles in 6 sets of 2. So that's interesting, right? So immediately, as a Bible student, I wonder, why is this given to me in 6 sets of 2? Why is it written like this? I actually think that maybe that's clear, isn't it? That when Jesus sent them out later on, he sent them out 2 by 2. And Luke, who knew this, perhaps puts them in the pairs that they went on a missionary work on. Right, so that's interesting immediately. That Matthew and Thomas were fellow laborers. Maybe that would be interesting if I was studying Matthew and saying, does Matthew talk about Thomas? Or, what Gospels talk about Thomas's doubt after the resurrection? And how do these things fit together? And then how do I put together the fact that the 2 Judases were partners if I'm interpreting this correctly? So there's lots of things to think about right off the bat that I wouldn't have noticed except I go through it and break it out. Now the next thing I go do is I read it again. And this time I mark my verbs. I'm sorry, I should just zoom in just a little bit so you can see what we've got going on here. It came to pass in those days that he went out. So notice how went and out are the same Greek word. He went out. Actually, it's all the same Greek word. But I can mark that. I only mark my main clauses. So then I go to text, and I go over and I hit red. That's how I mark my verbs. He went out into a mountain to pray and continued all night in prayer to God. Sometimes I will mark the intermediate, the sub clauses, the dependent clauses, and sometimes not. But I will in this case. To pray, he continued all night. Isn't that interesting? That's all one word, in prayer to God. And so I'll mark that a slightly different shade of red, just for my own sanity. It came to pass is also one word. So came to pass is the verb part, and I'll mark that dark red as well. And it came to pass in those days that he went into a mountain to pray and continued all night in prayer to God. And when it was day, no verb there, was the verb there, I'm sorry, mark that dark red, he called unto him his disciples. And of them, he called, then is the main verb here, called unto, right, again, one word, make that red. He called unto him his disciples, and of them he chose 12. So there's 12 is the verb there, sorry, dark red, whom he also named apostles. So there we go, make that dark red too. Simon, whom he also named Peter, and Andrew, his brother. I'm not going to go through into the verbs and stuff in the list, because I don't think that that's really what I'm going to be looking at for here, right? It's a list that includes the fact that some of them had other names. That's important. That's helpful. It's something we need to think about, is the descriptions and stuff that are given of each of them. But it's not essential to what I'm trying to do with this particular part. So then I read it again, and I mark the subjects. So, and it, there's the subject, came to pass in those days that he, that's the subject, went into a mountain to pray, and he continued all night in prayer to God. And when it was day, he called unto him his disciples, and of them he chose 12, whom he also named apostles. If you hold down Control, you can select multiple things at once, and then I can go and I can turn all those blue. So now I see my subjects and verbs marked out explicitly. So it came to pass, he went to a mountain, he called them, he chose 12, he named them apostles. It's very clear, isn't it, what the kind of structure is here, that Jesus is the active agent, that the apostles are not volunteering to be apostles, that Jesus goes to a mountain, he prays all night long, then he calls his disciples, and then he chooses 12 of them, and he names them apostles. Like immediately saying the subjects, he. Makes a lot of sense to me. Again, it came to pass. I can notice too, egeneto is the same word in both of these. And so perhaps I would want to just put a circle here, click the circle, click another circle here, and drag that out. And drag that out. And then I can connect these with a line. Just so that later, the worst ink is better than the strongest memory. Remind myself later, I wonder if there's a reason, should I make anything of the fact there's a parallel here? Because it's interesting, there's a parallel, it came to pass in those days, while it was yet day, hemera, right? Tais hemeres, right? There's the same parallelism. Now, I want to read it, Simon, whom he also named Peter, and Andrew his brother, James and John, Philip and Bartholomew, Matthew and Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, and Simon called Zelotes, and Judas the brother of James, and Judas Iscariot, which also was the traitor. So I've read it 3 times now, once for the main idea earlier, once to break it down, once for the subjects, once for the verbs, 4 times. Then I go through and I look at my conjunctions. Now, I printed out to do this part. I don't actually do this on the computer, but you could, right? So I go through and I want to mark all of my conjunctions. And so I bracket them, but I'll circle them for the sake of the computer. And it came to pass in those days that he went into a mountain to pray, and he continued all night in prayer to God. And when it was day, he called unto him his disciples, and of them he chose 12, whom also, it's a conjunction, he named apostles, Simon, whom he also named Peter, and Andrew his brother, James, and John, Philip, and Bartholomew, Matthew, and Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, and Simon called Zelotes, and Judas the brother of James, that and is added in, and Judas Iscariot, which also, there's another conjunction, was the traitor. Okay, I'm sorry, I went too far, but you see that, right? See the way we've now marked the conjunction. So now I've read it 5 times, and more to come. So the next thing that I would do is I'd go through and say, hey, what are some of the main words that I need to do a word study on? Right? And then I'd mark those too. Okay, so you could do that in different ways. Again, I do this on paper, this part. I do the color coding and the indenting and stuff by on the computer, and then I print it out and mark my conjunctions and highlight my keywords with a crayon, the twistable crayons, and mark that to study. But you think about this, right? What are the things that you'd want to see here? Well, I would want to make sure that I'm familiar with this idea of prayer. I'd want to make sure that I know what a disciple is and what an apostle is. I mean, backwards and forwards, right? I want to read about that in one of the dictionaries. I want to work all these things out. And then, I'd have all that done. So at that point, I've read it 6 times. And then I'm going to read through it again. And I'm going to list all the observations I can come up with. And I'm going to read through it again and list every question I can come up with. The way that I do this, personally, is I will go to my audio Bible here. I'll go to my Bible here. And I will click read aloud, okay? CSB doesn't have a real one. It's just got a system narrator. But what I do is I read it aloud with Word open on another tab. And as I'm reading, as it's reading to me, I write down every question that occurs to me. I pretend I don't know anything about the Bible, and I write down every question I can come up with. And when I write down every question I can come up with, then I've got the things I'm going to start looking up to answer. So I can click these 3 dots. I can click read aloud.
On another Sabbath he entered the synagogue and was teaching.
Okay, you can see you can adjust that, of course.
And a man was there whose right hand was shriveled. The scribes and Pharisees were...
So you can see immediately, I can go through and I can do that. I can cross-reference these things. So once I've done all that, then I start looking up specific words. So I'd want to know really what's the background of this word traitor, right? Prodetes. And I'm like, hey, wait a second. That's the word for give, and pro, like does traitor mean give away or something? Like, so I go to Bible word study and I go here and I look it up and I can read through the background of this language and say, it's the word traitor. It is the compound of the word give, and say, wow, that's really interesting. So he's going to give Jesus away for 30 pieces of silver, and kind of work through these different things. And then I want to just really reflect on some of this stuff, the word by word. Then when I've done that work, I go into the passage guide that I showed you and go through these sections one at a time to make sure that I'm understanding what's going on. And then once I know my text, I'm prepared to figure out how to teach my text. All right, I know that was a lot. Again, there's so much that software can do, but between the context menu that I did in the last video I did and the passage guide from this video, I think you really can get a powerful sense of the things that Logos can do. So let me know if you have any questions, if there's anything that I can add additional clarity to, and have a great day.